It's late in the afternoon on September 30th, 1955. The sun is dropping low over central California, throwing long shadows across a quiet two-lane highway near a crossroads called Cholame. A silver sports car is moving fast down that road. Too fast, maybe. On its hood, painted in black, there's a number, 130. On its tail, 2 words, Little Bastard. In a few minutes, that car is going to be folded around the front end of another vehicle, and the 24-year-old driving it is going to be gone. But here's the part almost nobody tells you. That number, that name, the whole look that made this car recognizable in every newspaper photo, every biography, every museum case for the next 70 years, none of it came from the factory. A man with a paintbrush put it there, by hand, in the last week of James Dean's life. And by the time Dean climbed behind the wheel that afternoon, his car already looked exactly the way the world would remember it forever. This is the story of how a Hollywood sign painter, working out of a small shop on Sunset Boulevard, turned a Porsche into a legend, and how, without meaning to, he painted the last portrait James Dean would ever pose for. To understand why that paint job mattered so much, you have to understand what kind of man James Dean was becoming in the summer of 1955, and what kind of car he'd just talked himself into buying. By the middle of 1955, James Dean wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a phenomenon in the making. East of Avu, Eden had already opened that spring, and people were calling him the next Marlon Brando. Some were saying he might end up bigger. He just wrapped Giant, a sprawling epic alongside Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson, and Rebel Without a Cause was sitting in the can, waiting for its October release. Dean hadn't seen either one hit theaters yet. He had no idea that within a year, his face would be on the wall of practically every teenager in America. What people close to him knew, though, was that Dean had a second obsession that had nothing to do with acting. He loved speed. He'd started racing in the spring of that year, in a Porsche 356 Speedster, and he was good at it. In his very first amateur event, at Palm Springs in March, he won his class outright and finished second overall the next day. He raced again at Bakersfield, took third. He tried Santa Barbara over Memorial Day weekend and didn't finish. But by then, the bug had bitten hard. People who knew him well said he approached a racetrack the same way he approached a scene in front of a camera. Fully committed, no half measures, and not particularly interested in anyone telling him to be careful. Word around the studio lot was that Warner Brothers wasn't thrilled about their rising star risking his neck on a racetrack. Insurance companies don't like betting on movie stars who might total themselves before the picture even opens. And for months, that tension sat quietly in the background of everything Dean did behind the wheel. But Giant had wrapped. For the first time since he'd signed his contract, nobody at the studio had the leverage to tell him to slow down, so he didn't. He traded in that Porsche Speedster, added $3,800 from an advance Warner Brothers had floated him, and ordered something faster, a brand new Porsche 550 Spyder, one of the rarest purpose-built racing cars in the world at the time. Porsche would only ever build around 90 of them. It was small, low to the AVC, ground, mid-engined, and built to be raced, not admired in a driveway. On September 21st, 1955, Dean picked it up from Competition Motors in Hollywood. He had 9 days left to live and he didn't know it. Think about that for a second. 9 days. If you knew you had 9 days left, would you spend them the way he did? Dean wasn't the kind of man who eased into anything. Within days of picking up the Spyder, he'd already put it through a couple of rough moments. He clipped something on the street and knocked the lens off a turn signal. He spun the car out on Mulholland Drive and dented a rear quarter panel on a row of garbage cans. He didn't have his full racing license yet either. He'd only run a handful of amateur events, so the California Sports Car Club gave him a temporary number to run instead of a permanent one. That number was 130. Dean wanted the car to look the part before he ever took it to a track. He drove it over to a customizer named George Barris, a man who'd later go on to build the Batmobile for television, and had the seats redone in tartan plaid, with a pair of thin red stripes painted over the rear wheel arches. It wasn't a radical transformation. It was the kind of personal touch any young racer might add to a new car to make it feel like his own. Then, right next door, a sign painter and pinstriper named Dean Jeffries got to work with a brush and a can of paint. He put the number 130 on the hood, on both doors, and across the rear deck. lid, in the same bold style he used on race cars up and down the California coast. Then, in careful script just above the license plate light, he painted 2 words, "Little Bastard." It took him a matter of hours to finish the job. What those hours produced would outlive both men. Where that nickname came from depends on who you ask. Some people who knew Dean say it traced back to a blow-up with studio boss Jack Warner, who'd once called him a little bastard during a dispute over a trailer on the Sow, east of Edenset, and Dean decided to wear the insult like a badge. Others, including stunt driver Bill Hickman, who was close to Dean and would be there on the final drive, claimed he was the one who coined it, and that Dean in return started calling him Big Bastard. Nobody's ever nailed down which version is true. Both stories have been told for decades, and there's no surviving recording of Dean explaining it himself. There's one detail from those days that nobody has ever explained, not even the man who painted it on. George Barris asked Dean, more than once, why he'd chosen the number 130 for his car. Dean always dodged the question. Whatever the number meant to him, if it meant anything at all, he took the answer with him. Almost as soon as the car was finished, people around Dean started reacting to it in ways that went beyond admiration. He was cruising Sunset Boulevard in it, showing it off the way any 24-year-old with a new toy would, when he pulled up outside the Villa Capri restaurant and ran into the British actor Alec Guinness. Guinness would later write about the encounter in his own memoir. He said the car looked sinister to him, that something about it felt wrong the moment he laid eyes on it. And according to Guinness, he told Dean flatly, if he got into that car, he'd be found dead in it within a week. Dean laughed it off. By most accounts, he thought it was a strange, slightly funny thing for a grown man to say about a car. He wasn't the only one who felt uneasy around it either. The singer and actress Eartha Kitt, a friend of his, told him directly that she didn't like the thing. Dean brushed that off too. Whether you believe in omens or not, here's what's not up for debate. Guinness made that comment on or around September 23, 1955, the very same week Dean Jeffries had just finished painting the car, and the crash that killed James Dean happened almost exactly 7 days later. Would it have changed anything if Dean had taken that warning seriously? Or was a man like him always going to get behind the wheel anyway? For the rest of that week, Dean drove the Spyder every chance he got, breaking it in, getting a feel for a car that handled nothing like his old Speedster. He was getting ready for a real race, the Salinas Road Race, scheduled for the first weekend of October up in Central California. It would be his first outing in the 550, and by every account, he was excited about it. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a rich man's hobby car. He intended to compete. On the morning of September 30th, Dean drove his Ford station wagon over to Competition Motors, where his mechanic, a sharp Porsche factory-trained technician named Rolf Wutterich, had the Spyder ready to go. The original plan was simple: load the Porsche onto a trailer behind the Ford and tow it up to Salinas, the way most racers moved their cars between events. But Wutterich had a different idea. He suggested Dean drive the race. Spyder there instead, on the open road. It would put real miles on the new engine before the race, and it would give Dean more seat time in a car he'd owned for barely a week. Dean agreed. It's a small decision, the kind people make 100 times without a second thought. But it's the decision that put him behind the wheel that afternoon, instead of riding along in the passenger seat of a station wagon, watching the Spyder roll safely behind him on a trailer. There was no argument about it. No hesitation that anyone who was there ever described. It felt at the time like the obvious call. A brand new race car needed miles on it before a race weekend, and Dean, more than anyone, wanted to be the one putting them on. They set out around lunchtime. Dean and Wutterich rode together in the low, silver Spyder. Behind them followed the support car, the same 1955 Ford station wagon, now pulling an empty trailer driven by stunt driver Bill Hickman, with photographer Sanford Roth riding along. Roth had been documenting Dean's racing hobby for a magazine feature, and that afternoon, without either of them knowing it, he was about to take some of the last photographs ever taken of James Dean alive. The drive north was long, nearly 300 miles, and it wasn't uneventful. Somewhere along the way, a highway patrolman pulled Dean over and wrote him a speeding ticket. At one stop, Hickman pulled Dean aside and told him to watch his speed. The Spyder sat so low and was such a pale color that other drivers on the highway might have real trouble seeing it coming. Dean brushed that off too. the same way he'd brushed off Guinness and Kitt. By late afternoon, the group had stopped once more for gas near Sherman Oaks. Roth snapped a photograph of Dean leaning against the car. It's one of the most reproduced images of him that exists today. It was taken roughly 4 hours before he died. How many warnings does one person get in a single week before something like this happens? Dean got at least 3 that we know of and kept driving anyway. At around 5:45 that evening, Dean's Spyder was heading west on Highway 466 near the junction with Highway 41, close to a small crossroads town called Cholame. A 23-year-old Cal Poly student named Donald Turnipseed was driving the opposite direction in a Ford Tudor sedan. As he approached the junction, Turnipseed began a left turn across the highway, directly into Dean's lane. Whether it was the low afternoon sun in his eyes, or the fact that a small silver car moving fast is hard to judge at a distance, Turnipseed never saw the Spyder in time. The two cars came together almost head-on. The Porsche was thrown into the air and landed in a ditch against a telephone pole. Vutherick was thrown clear of the wreck and survived, badly injured. Turnipseed walked away with only minor injuries. Dean was trapped in the crushed cockpit of his own car. He was rushed to Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital, about half an hour away. He was pronounced dead on arrival. James Dean was 24 years old. He never saw Rebel Without a Cause open in theaters the following week. He never saw Giant released the following year, the film that would earn him his second posthumous Academy Award nomination, a nomination that arrived for a man the world could no longer thank in person. News of the crash spread fast, and it hit an audience that hadn't even fully discovered him yet. Teenagers across the country would spend the rest of that decade turning a young actor with 3 films to his name into one of the most enduring symbols in American pop culture. The leather jacket, the squint, the restless energy that seemed to promise trouble. Fan mail reportedly kept arriving at studio offices for years after he was gone, some of it from people who apparently hadn't heard or didn't want to believe that he'd already died. The wreck of the Spyder itself didn't disappear quietly. The insurance company auctioned off what remained of it, and George Barris, the same man who'd trimmed those tartan seats, bought the remains. In one of the strangest footnotes to this whole story, the car's engine had survived the crash almost completely intact. It was pulled from the wreck and installed in a completely different racing car, a Lotus, driven by another amateur racer who had no connection to Dean at all. Part of the little bastard kept racing for years after the man who named it was gone, isn't it? Strange that the one part of the car built purely for speed and performance, the engine, was the one thing that survived while everything else was destroyed. Nobody ever got a straight answer out of James Dean about why he chose the number 130. Nobody can say for certain whether Little Bastard came from a fight with Jack Warner or a joke with Bill Hickman. What we do know, because it's documented and photographed and written into more than one witness's own memoir, is this. In the last 9 days of his life, a Hollywood sign painter gave James Dean's car the exact look history would remember it by. The number, the name, the whole unmistakable silhouette. A full week before that car carried him to his death. Not hours, a week. And somehow, that week feels even eerier than if it had happened all at once. It means Dean spent his final days literally driving around inside the image the whole world now associates with his ending, showing it off to friends, laughing off warnings, completely unaware that the paint was already drying on the last chapter of his life. Porsche only ever built around 90 of these 550 Spyders, and today, fewer than half of them are known to still exist anywhere in the world. When one of Dean's sister cars, same model, same silver paint, no connection to him at all, came up for auction in England a few years back, it sold for the equivalent of well over $5 million. Take away the crash, take away the paint job, and you'd still be looking at one of the most valuable small batch race cars Porsche ever produced. Add James Dean's name to it, and it stops being a car at all. It becomes a relic. So here's a question worth sitting with. If you'd heard Alec Guinness say those words to your face, that you'd be dead within the week if you got in that car, would you have listened? Drop your honest answer below, because I'm curious how many of us would have laughed it off exactly the way Dean did. If you want more stories like this, 1. The real history behind the icons and the machines that made them legends. Hit subscribe, and if you're watching on your TV, just point your remote at the screen and click the button right there. There's another video linked at the end of this one about what happened to the wreckage of this very car afterward. The fires, the injuries, the strange trail it left behind everyone who touched it. Some people call it a curse. Judge for yourself. Thanks for sitting with this story. I'll see you in the next one.